stars be with you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast. Here we have today a returning guest that has, I think it's been a second since she's been on the podcast, but she's always a fantastic person to join me in conversation, and that is Analisa Six. Thanks for joining me again, Analisa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And conversation is what we will be doing. Why? Because, well, A, it's a podcast, but it's also Gemini season. And that is why we are coming together here today to talk all about Gemini and Mercury coming to the forefront. And this Gemini season is definitely lit. There is a lot going on. So we are going to want to dive in as soon as possible. But before we get started here, just in case you're new to the program and have not heard Analisa on our space before, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love talking to you and doing this, so I'm excited to be back. I'm Analisa. I've been an astrologer practicing since the end of 2016 and doing professional reading since 2017. I've always been interested in this stuff since I was a little kid. I was obsessed with my horoscope, obsessed with astrology. I'm also a tarot reader, a musician. I work with dogs and cats. And I just moved to Hollywood in February. And I'm a Leo, Sag rising, Pisces moon. So
she's got that fire water.
I've got the fire water.
Which is so funny because you have some really prominent Earth placements too. And I always think
Thank
of
God.
you. Yeah, I know, that's true. Because I do always think of it, you have this down to earth sensibility to you. But there is the passion and the creative bent that all fire and water has. So I feel like Analisa, as well as myself, we have charts that are very well-rounded when it comes to elemental representation, which not everybody does have, and one's not better than the other, but it is interesting to think when you have different players and in different elements, how that helps everything to be represented, I suppose.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel really grateful for being well-rounded.
Oh my goodness, this sounds like a Venus talk here. Speaking of Venus, just heads up for when we're recording this. We're recording this on May 15th, so a few days before we go into Gemini season, but Mercury has just moved into Taurus today. So we have one more planet that is on Venus's team. I don't know if you've noticed this at all, but especially since the end of April, when Venus moved into Taurus and Mars moved into Aries, there's sort of been this like two-part story going on, right? Because we have those two planets in domicile, and all the planets are either deferring to the end of the Venus chain or they're deferring to Mars. And those are, completely different energies. And so I feel like there's been this two-part story where there's this connective Venus growth vibe in one area, but then there's this like rowdy Mars stress. And Mercury's been on that Mars team this whole time. And I am excited for Mercury to switch teams. So have you felt that kind of like two-part energy at all?
I definitely have. I feel like it was a very obvious shift in my life, like just so much kind of the whole like Aries story and Aries arc has been just so volatile, I feel like.
Solid word, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's just everything has felt very fast, very rushed, very like not well thought out. Like there's not a lot of practical, slow, pragmatic action. It's very, we got to hurry up and do this in the most intense, insane way. And it feels that way like around me, like not just, it's not like me trying to be that way. It feels like no matter how much I try to slow things down, it's just not going to happen that way. So I'm really hoping that Mercury and Taurus joining the Taurus party just kind of calms a lot of that energy down because yeah, it's hard to be in a constant state of impatience or intensity kind of under the
Yeah,
surface. Yeah.
100%. Um, yes. And it's interesting when you think of like, because we're like, oh, so much is going on in Taurus. I know people, so many people were talking about, oh, the new moon in Taurus. It's the best new moon of 2024. And I'm not trying to be down on any benefic action. Venus and Jupiter are wonderful planets. Um, but I don't know if it, I don't know if I would say it's the most beneficent new moon. I think it could be in longer term, longer range growth, but there is sort of what you were just talking about, this stress and this rush and this, I mean, in some spaces, having to deal with some sort of crisis, that is going along with that story. And so if you really think about it, if there's going to be any planets in Mars adding to that reactivity and that rush, Mercury and Mars are like, I don't want to say the worst companions, but I mean those are the
I
planets
don't
that are
like
going
it.
to, like that those are the
Yeah, I'm not a
planets.
fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, not my favorite.
So, well, I mean, what do you think about this new moon energy that happened? I mean, it was about a week ago, a little over a week ago, but just what's your take on it?
I actually do feel like it was really beneficial in comparison to where we've been. So for
Mm,
me, it did kind of feel like and maybe it's like it is the Venus Jupiter part that I think I'm feeling maybe more than the lunar part, but I do kind of feel like there were some things that came to fruition, like physical fruition around that time that felt good. And it did feel kind of like from the eclipse to that, I feel like I preferred that, if
true.
that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
So for me, I guess I keep comparing kind of over the last like 4 months versus where things feel now. It feels like, oh, there's kind of more of this clarity or this traction around this new moon. So I do feel a little bit more grounded around that energy than what I have felt previously, but I don't know if I guess it just depends on your perspective of the like
True.
entire yeah, like just like are you like how much of it are you how many eggs are you trying to put in the new moon's basket? I think for me it was just kind of like, oh, finally we get this opportunity to kind of stabilize some of the energy that hasn't been stable. Like that's kind of how it's felt for me.
Yeah,
Like here's a break. Like whenever we get to those like couple months in the year where I see kind of like a break where it's like not quite as chaotic as it was, I'm always like, okay, cool. Like I'm gonna feel like I'm gaining some control over something in some way for a second. And I guess that's kind of how it felt to me.
yeah. No, I totally get that. I totally get that. Even when there were Mars stories that still required this, that, or the other thing, there is at least this piece of self that can help ground down and get perspective with the slower pace or the patience. Because when we're all rush and we're all like, I gotta get in there and react, if there's not that like little dose of patience, whether in the moment or for like the long term, you know, manifestation of something, that it can be very extra heated. And so I think that all that Taurus energy has been helping in the slow it down, the patience. This is a process, get in, settle into it. Rome wasn't built in a day. I'll just throw all
Yeah.
the throw all
Totally.
of it at it. So yeah, it's a yeah, I have mixed feelings about it, not in a bad way or a good way. It's just, I guess I'm doing a Gemini thing, Mars and Gemini. I'm just comparing data.
Yeah.
And this is my data thus far. So, speaking of Mercury, right? We are going into Gemini season, and Mercury and Taurus, which we have just been giving a little airtime to, is going to be a big factor of Gemini season, right? Because we're going to have Gemini season with Mercury and Taurus and Mercury in Gemini in its own sign. So there will be the characteristics of those two signs at play. But before we get into any of that, let's do a little recap around Gemini energy in general. So, when I say Gemini season, what's the first things that come to mind to you?
I personally, and I think I'm projecting my descendant in Gemini, but it feels very social to me, like a very
Mm.
like amplified, I want to share ideas. I want to connect with people. I feel like I'm going to probably be really busy. My social calendar is going to be really full. I also associate it with a heightened level of anxiety, like maybe my neuroses or overthinking qualities might be amplified at this time. I think for having a descendant in Gemini and being Sag rising, I definitely think I want a lot of connection during this time of year. So that's something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Mercury is a connector piece, and we are going to have Venus in Gemini during this season too. And Venus is actually going to make a conjunction with the Sun in her rebirth process, which is definitely going to be a big part of the energy that we're feeling. Now, whether that makes us social or it makes us want to sort of like hide in our process of, getting attuned to our uh like inner Venusian self, it just will depend. And it was probably, in pure duality, the spirit of duality, it could be a little bit of both, which Mercury loves to bring. But I think you're absolutely right. Gemini is like the buzzing beehive. It's like,
Mhm. Yep.
over here, let me talk to you about this problem. Zip, 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 but let's talk about this. Um, and so that's exciting, for especially for the people that like to be out and about and enjoy the pleasures of companionship. To people that aren't so much, and there's a lot of busy energy, like Annalisa said, it can be definitely have that anxiety feeling. It's like, oh, why is so much being thrown at me? There's too much information, too many people are talking, too many opinions. you
Yeah, too many
know?
ideas, too many different pathways to how something can go. The analysis paralysis is so
Mm.
common with Mercury dominant people.
Yeah, and when that's a great point to bring up the tarot cards associated with
Yeah.
Gemini season, right? We got the Eight of Swords, the Nine of Swords, the Ten of Swords, the Three Swords. No one wants, you know.
Yeah. Nobody wants those
Um,
cards.
Nobody wants those swords. And so it's interesting that Gemini, just as a sign, has been associated with the ending of the swords minors, but also the pairing of the Lover's card and the Magician for Mercury. And so,
Mhm.
I mean, what do you think about that actually? Sort of that tarot pairing, you think, oh, the Magician, the Lovers, but then you're like 8, 9, 10 of swords. And you're like, excuse me.
I mean, it really feels on brand for Gemini in terms of the Castor Pollux mythos of
Mm,
the living in the underworld and kind of, even like with their sisters and the split halves and then trying to find each other again and all of that kind of stuff. So I think just the amount of weird different rabbit holes you can go in with Mercury in general. Like there's the hermaphroditic quality of Mercury, that's genderless. There's the passing between the living and the dead. Like, isn't it Hermes that has like kind of the only ability to travel freely, between that,
yeah.
and Hermes is associated with Mercury. There's just it's so dense. I feel like Gemini is one of the most dense signs when you really start to get, and I guess that's super, like we could say that about every sign in a certain way when you start getting into the esoteric kind of rabbit hole, but I do feel like Mercury's got so much behind it, especially in like the Western occult, like Hermes Trismegistus, like is kind of, Thoth, like that's such a dominant archetype of magic with a K, the
Hmm.
occult. And so, if we think about Gemini in association with that and the kind of dominant role that the Lover's card and the Magician play within that journey, I think it's pretty profound. But yeah, I think Gemini, I wore my Venus shirt because of Venus and Gemini. Venus is the esoteric ruler of Gemini, right? And rules that Lover's card. And so that conjunction within the self is always something that I find really fascinating, like the upper and lower triangle into the heart space, finding the divine masculine and feminine within the self. that path in Gemini is so beautiful to me. Like it's such a um beautiful thing to kind of get into. I'm so much more interested in the conjunction of the self than I am in the story of the lovers being a story of romance, like partnership in that way. I love partnership and romance, but I think the true journey from a mystic's perspective is that conjunction of the self. And then when you go to Mercury and the Magician card, it's that beginning of that, you know, story of kind of like, I know I have all of these skill sets and the cups, the water, you know, the swords, the air, pentacles, the earth, the as above, so below, the candle flame, like everything about it, you know, is kind of like you, that self discovery of like, oh, I have the power to get here and to do
Mm.
this in the Thoth way, in the Hermes way, you know, which, you know, is the magician of the occult. Like you're going down that hero's journey there. So yeah, it's so complex. I'm like,
Well,
where do you begin?
yeah, where do you begin? I mean, even when you were talking about like, Gemini is so dense, like the last thing we would think for a mutable air sign would be density. But I think you're absolutely right because is so much complexity to it that it's paradoxical in many ways. And I think that is the essence of Mercury and Gemini is the paradox of reality and the whole this and that is true, and there are these different stories that we can tell about our lives and about other people, and then where is the truth? And I think that is where the Sagittarius part comes in, even though that has a different side of truth. But there is this multi-layer reality around the mind and Gemini energy to come together, and what you're talking about to get to this sense of conjunction with the self and the dual sides and the dual natures, not just in a mundane space but also in a spiritual space. So uh it's kind of exciting because I think Gemini has way more, and Mercury in general and Magician has way more power than we might attribute it at times, because we think, oh, I'm just thinking that, or this thought just popped into my head. But where do we run with those intentions? Because we know, like anything that we think, and this has been a big lesson of mine. I've been in a moon year since last July, and I have moon in Capricorn in the third house. And talk about getting tested on your inner mental skills. Um, Capricorn's not the most positive of signs all the time. And so I've been on this journey of really becoming aware of the uh the effect my mind has and my thought patterns have on my reality. And I think that is something that we have the opportunity to really get a hold on within ourselves. And like what you're talking about, that union of the self, to get on the same page with what it's like to make peace with the self, come together with the self, to create the intentions of the true self in the outer world by using the mind and projected intentions. That, I mean, it's not always positive, but there is a level of why do I want to use the word careful thinking? I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes any sense at
Yeah, it
all.
does. Yeah. No, I think so. I think that like going back to the tarot on the same vein of what you're saying, like we have the lovers and the magician, which are like these really beautiful, empowering cards. And then we get to these minors that are so, I mean, the minors, like if we really think about it, are just kind of like the human drama, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like it's the superficial external drama that's happening above the major arcana story. And so I think that like if we look at the super like right, every sign is like the superficial kind of quality to it, and then there's like the dense, karmic esoteric quality. So I see kind of like the 8, 9, and 10 of swords as the Gemini's superficial kind of like outward expression that we tend to reduce Gemini to on a mundane level, like but it's like we have to break through that in order to get to the majors. So that's kind of what I think you're saying in terms of careful
Yes.
thinking. It's like you have to work through the 8 of swords, the self-created worries and fears and doubts that stem from whatever separation is your illusion, right? Like in the Eight of Swords, separation is the illusion. Like this is all happening to me, within me. I'm creating this narrative and nobody else gets it. And I, have this blindfold on and I'm alone in my worry. And then we take the blindfold off. And in the Nine of Swords, it's like you can actually look at things for how they are. And maybe there's some legitimate things in the subconscious that are really scary to admit about yourself, but at least you're consciously facing it in the Nine of Swords. And then the Ten of Swords, you're ready to jump off that cliff. And the Mother of Peace deck, it's everybody, it's like a bunch of Romans jumping off a cliff, I think, into the ocean. And I really like that depiction because it's like you're surrendering, the swords are like flying in the air and you're just like, I give up, I give up on holding on to these fears. And I relate a lot to that, where it's like, when shit kind of hits the fan, like it's like, you're afraid of all these things. Like you list all your fears. And then what happens if all of those fears come true?
Mm.
A lot of times you surprise yourself by the way you end up showing up when all of your fears come true. And there it does kind of hit a point where you have to just let go and let God and just be kind of like, I am not driving this ship. There is some divine intervention happening in my life right now. And I am just going to let the swords do what they're going to do. And then, hopefully you come out of it in this, kind of Page of Swords rebirth kind of, process. We're talking about Venus and Gemini being kind of the rebirth process. But it's just interesting, I think, to think of like careful thinking or careful, analyzing, and kind of also it's that whole like, abracadabra, like words or spells kind of
Yes,
things. And Gemini,
exactly.
Mercury, Thoth, there's all of that, I mean, it's all tied back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, being very aware of what we're thinking, because as we say, what we focus on grows. And especially this is a big thing with Gemini season this year, is we're going to have Jupiter moving into Gemini. And so you think something's going to grow, Gemini, you better believe it with Jupiter there. So having that, and Jupiter in Gemini is the ruler for the Eight of Swords, right? So, and that sort of analysis paralysis and that getting tied up within your own negativity or worries or overactive mental state. And so how can we really, if there's one thing to take advantage of in Gemini season, is how can we get a grip on the mind in such a way that it facilitates how we want to grow and expand and what we want to attract to us and our desires, right? Especially with Venus there. Because yeah, if we get our heads in this space, and it's a positive one, I mean, in reason to what your life looks like, or maybe even let's say a neutral one, because that's the beauty of air, is it allows the observer effect to come in. How do I get it detached enough from something to understand it without I guess emotional bias, kind of that cool, airy, detached feel. But if we're really mired in something that has taken on an emotional tone, it helps to get to that objectivity so we can see the varying parts of it, back to the duality and back to what you were talking about with the illusion of the mind, like let's get a grip on that, because that will be where the power is. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
It makes me want to pull out big news for we got our Tarot of Her prototype. I don't know if
Yes, I
anybody's been
ordered mine.
following. Yay! We and I just wanted to show the image if I can find it real quick. We could talk about other things and we can come back to it, but the image that Sarah Jane, the illustrator for the deck, did of the Ten of Swords, I think is such a beautiful representation of sort of what this energy can feel like as and what we can really get out of Gemini season. Oh, there's the Nine of Swords and the
Oh,
anguish,
nice.
the
Oh,
lady
that's
who's all
beautiful.
she's like filled up and with sort of like the negativity of the cosmos, and is on a, just laying on a bed of cactus because that's
Wow.
that's fun. Um,
I used to
but
have an acupressure mat. You know what those are?
oh yeah.
It's kind of like laying on a bed of cactus.
It is. It's very is and it's like very uncomfortable at first, but then you get comfortable with it. Is that what?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
something to think about here.
I know. I was
We
having a
get
whole thing
comfortable
with
with our
that.
pain.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the eight of it's called the leaves in our deck, but our
So
stork
good.
is totally wrapped up in her thoughts and being trapped. I called it captivity. Okay, so here's the 10. And I thought this was just a beautiful representation. And so here we have this woman who's looking in a huge glass mirror, and we got the lunar phases going on. She's got a kind of a full moon, and she's got all these leaves, all these cactus leaves in her back. But as she looks into her
Wow.
reflection in the mirror, none of that's there, right?
Wow.
So it's kind of like this. I think the term I wanted to bring up in relation to what we were talking about, the 10 of leaves, and you talking about, I know we're going on a tarot tangent here, but you talking about the page of swords energy that can be on the flip side is the power of the beginner's mind.
Yeah.
How do you look at life in a way you've never looked at it before?
Yeah. Totally.
And so we are going to bring in that beginner's mind energy into the podcast today as we look at some of this stuff and encourage that you do the same. So let's think about what else is going on. Gemini season. We have, as far as the lunar overview is concerned, we have the Taurus new moon cycle that we talked about a little bit ago here. We have a full moon in Sag, right when Gemini season starts. And then we have mutable quarters, which, if you think about mutable energy, transition. So I feel like there's a lot of transition at play here. And I mean, what's your take on? I know you got some mutable placements. What's your take on mutability?
Well, it's interesting. I think that if I didn't have so much earth energy, I'd probably look at mutability a lot more scattered than how it plays out for me in an anecdotal way. So I feel like a lot of my clients that I've attracted are really mutable as well. I do really well teaching and counseling other mutable people. And I tend to attract a lot of people that lack more earth than I do. So I've learned a lot about mutable energy in that way because I think I am a little bit different than purely mutable energy just from having more grounding me and more fixed energy. So I see mutable energy as being very expansive and analytical in a way that is kind of like a runaway train. And it's always kind of in this mode of wanting to um it's almost like Jupiter, like there's a Jupiter vibe with a lot of mutable energy where it's like all encompassing, like it kind of just wants to keep going and going and going. And it's like, at what point do you pull all of it back in and kind of rein it in? And I think a lot of mutable dominant people tend to really benefit from being around fixed and cardinal people because it's more linear and grounded. So, adaptable. I think that expansive, adaptable, analytical, and very, we think about Pisces as like mutable water and being a sponge. Like there's no, it's the fish, in the ocean. It's just absorbing, constantly absorbing and feeling. And then Gemini thinking, analyzing. There's no, end or limit to it. Sagittarius seeking, philosophizing, pondering. There's no, like, as a Sag rising, there's no end to the question why.
Yeah.
It's that question it's like a well that has no bottom. It's like you peel back the layers, and that's where my brain glitches out. Like my mom, is Catholic, and I was raised to believe in God, and I was raised to, have this kind of like fundamental understanding that there's a higher power. But I'm of the mind where I can't keep asking the why and peeling back the layers. I can't just settle with there's a God. Like I have to go, but what's that God's God? Or who's running that ship? Or what's that? What's that? And it's like that Memento movie cover where it just like the photos just keep going back and back and back. And there's this film on Netflix called The Science of Infinity, where a bunch of
Mm-mm.
quantum physicists start to unpack the science and the theories that they have around infinity. And it kind when you watch that, it's very much like that. It's very kind of talking about these like multi-dimensional realities and how it's never ending, and there's all these different versions of us happening simultaneously, and every truth that has ever been thought of exists in these multi-dimensional, aspects of infinity and how they're proving this and all of that kind of stuff. So when I think about mutable energy, that's what I think of. I think of this infinite range within the elements, and the fact that there's no bottom to the well, there's no wall, there's nothing, kind of grounding it. And obviously Virgo being mutable earth is probably the closest to creating something physical and tangible. But I think of Virgo as like a vine in a forest that is never going to stop. Or spores, like think of like mushroom, fungus, and spores. Like we can't control that. We like you hear about those fungi outbreaks that happen, and they're trying to like get control of it in a hospital, and it's just growing, like the spores are growing on the walls. You can't contain it. Like that's how I think of Virgo, mutable energy is like the fungi taking over the world, that kind of thing.
Well,
That's
yeah, I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. Like the fungi is that mutable energy is always adapting to its environment, right? And
yeah.
so you're adapting and molding and like, working through it. And, I think about Virgo, obviously it has that energy of refinement and perfection. And so if you're constantly adapting to the physical world around you and you're trying to actually adapt the physical, then you're always in this perfection mode and like nothing really is ever quite right, or you can kind of stick with that because something else has to be attended to. And it really speaks to just the rulership of all those signs, right? Because all the mutable signs are either ruled by Mercury or
Or
Jupiter.
Jupiter.
Yeah, we got Mercury or Jupiter here. So it really speaks to everything that you were just saying, especially like this infinity principle, because there are no bounds to Jupiter. And Mercury, as we discussed earlier, is the planet that keeps going from one realm to another. Like it's the traveler that goes back and forth. So, uh, I mean, that it's very simple, but it could also be a lot to wrap your mind around. So take that in. Um, but think about that as we move through this mutable time, right? And your ability to adapt and move through things with that well, I am thinking about still what's going on in Taurus. Let me just say this. That is going to be very present. But Gemini season is definitely going to have this two-part energy where there's still going to be a lot going on in Taurus. And then there's going to be this shift to a lot going on in Gemini. And it's probably going to feel like night and day. And so when we're about to get into our breakdown with the charts here. And so you'll see, we'll define sort of when that shift takes place because it will be very synchronized with the planets. So the last thing I want to say, I mean, we have Mars moving through Aries and Taurus during this season, which will also create a two-part shift. So we'll talk a little bit. And Mars, actually, it's very important with Gemini season, is Mars is going to reach the eclipse degree, which we know in mundane astrology is usually an activator point for the eclipse energies to I just had the release the Kraken, like sort of energy. Not to scare anybody, but it does sort of have that force of the dragon is then lifted up with the Martian energy. So that will be taking place. And really, there's also we have to kind of have this context about the Jupiter and Saturn story, because with Jupiter moving into Gemini and we having all this action in this sign, we're really prepping the ground for the Jupiter Saturn square that's going to happen later in the summer. So keep that in mind. There could be a lot of foreshadowing or certain changes or thoughts and ideas that come up now that play a role later on in the game. So, shall we look at the chart? Shall we look at some
Yeah, let's do
charts?
it.
All right, let me get my mouse here. And okay, so You see the chart all right? Are we
Yeah, I see it great.
all right, we're in. And as you can see here, we have our first day of Gemini season, May 20th. The sun ingresses at 5:59 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Let me go ahead and get my annotation up in case I want to draw. And yeah, so here we got our sun at 0 degrees of Gemini. It's a Monday. We start the week fresh off in Gemini land. And really, the first thing that happens is that we have the sun. Oh, I'm drawing. Okay, give me back my cursor. We have the sun moving to trine Pluto, who is now retrograde in Aquarius. So the first couple days, we're kind of getting that sun, that we're getting that air vibe and getting a taste of Pluto in Aquarius. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Pluto and Aquarius? I haven't really got to pick your brain about that. What have you been
Oh,
feeling?
yeah. I mean, I feel very stereotypical astrologer with this. So I feel bad if I'm just like another broken record. But, like we're obviously collectively going through a huge social change in terms of what we've perceived previously as what societally is okay. Like Aquarius is breaking tradition, and we've had Pluto and Capricorn kind of already setting the stage for the dystopian future that we're entering with Pluto and Aquarius. I mean, I started writing actually, like I've been really inspired to write in a way that I haven't felt in a really long time. And I really feel like I'm living in dystopian reality, living in Hollywood. Like I was living in the desert, which is very dystopian in a different way. Like it has a very Mad Max kind of feel to it, but it's very behind in terms of technology, which I really like. Like I liked not having robots and drones like around
Yeah.
constantly. And then I moved to Hollywood, and it's like I can't really tell the difference between Blade Runner and like my current reality. It's like all very present, Hunger Games, like all of it's so present. And I feel like we're here now, and I feel like it feels very on brand for Pluto in Aquarius in terms of all of the sci-fi literature and films that have come out over the last 40 years, like it just
Mm.
feels very in alignment with that. I am one of the people that thinks we're entering the Aquarian age. I do think that a lot of the um kind of AI like dominating the narrative is going to be a huge part of this transit, the war machines, the artificial intelligent war machines, the way it's affecting art and culture. To have AI in the art and culture space and the writing spaces, I really see a completely different world 20 years from now. Like I really do. And I think that we're living it already to an extent. Like those of us that are choosing to kind of
Put the
stay
blinders
these.
on.
Yeah, and I admit that I do. Like I definitely choose to have a certain level of blinders, but I actually had a talk with myself, and my south node is Leo, north node's Aquarius. And so I had a talk with myself where, because having Saturn in Capricorn too natally, like I'm very much somebody that can hold on to the old. Like I like old music. I like, older fashion and literature and all of that. And I can get kind of in this, I was born in the wrong time kind of attitude.
Mm.
And I've been talking to myself about my North Node in Aquarius and kind of being like, no, you were born exactly in the time you were meant to be born in. And you are meant to be a part of the cultural movement and the cultural shift. And don't be the person that's trying to hold on to the cart and buggy, be the person that's ready to try the car, or try, put electricity in your home versus staying, I think about those older generations, like 100 years ago. Like I think about technology being introduced or the industrial movements. And it's like, that must have been so terrifying for so many people, especially with the kind of like Protestant, kind
Mm,
of
yeah.
this like homegrown white like religious culture, farm people, all that kind of stuff. And then we have these like city booms and this immigration, and everything's changing for everybody. And we still feel a lot of that fear culturally. There's a lot of people holding on to these really outdated old ways that are really harmful, I think. And then there's always this side to Aquarius. I'll stop this in a second. I could go off forever, but there's a side to Aquarius where there's the innovative, progressive idea. And the thing about Aquarians, like I'll just say, like they're this way as people, and then the archetype of the sign, it's always my perspective is the best or the better, regardless of what it is, just because it's progressive. But I think we have to remember the history. Like there's still that how we got to now or why things are a certain way. And I think in Aquarius, we can lose some of that. And that's where a lot of the mistakes get made in the future movements, is losing the lessons of the
Losing,
past.
yeah,
Yeah.
the value of the past, and
Yeah.
I totally get that. I totally get that. And that's where we got to kind of sort through it all. And I mean, very few people, I guess, other than mutable people, but even the mutable people, I feel very, don't always like change. And so when we go through these massive changes on a societal level, a lot of us are like holding on to, as the world tips, we're like holding on, like, no, don't do it. And really, really think about Pluto just running through a fixed sign anyways. It's been quite a time, it's been quite a long time since we've had Pluto in a fixed sign back in, I mean, you were born with Pluto in a fixed sign in Scorpio. So it's been quite some time since the great excavator the has rolled through the modality that least likes change. So yeah. So once again we're finding ourselves in this duality of where do we, how do we navigate it all, but also I think when we embrace kind of like what you said, you're like, I am born in the right time. I'm meant to engage with this stuff. It's like, it feels like you're the type of person that, well, for someone who already has it intrinsic and is born at this time, to really engage with it because you are able to see the two sides. You can see the value of the past and where this could go in the future. And so it's like this responsible evolution versus let's just go all in and not think about, because that really depends on how it all sets up, is who engages with it. Because who engages with it sets the tone of how it spreads and grows. And so the
Yeah.
people that are afraid of it, but have the caution needed to engage with it in a responsible fashion, like we need y'all the most because
Yeah.
then it can grow in a way that is sustainable, and not destructive. So all that being said, tangent, side note, Sun's gonna trine Pluto, and really it's sort of this precursor for Jupiter that's about to trine Pluto, which is definitely big news. Because if you see on the chart here, we have kind of two stories going on in the beginning of Gemini season before we get to the full moon, because we're going to have a full moon at 2 degrees and 55 minutes of Sagittarius on Thursday, May 23rd. So, but there's a lot going on before that happens. So the sun moves into Gemini. You can see here, let me get my little pin out. You can see we have this story of the sun. Oh, let me just draw right through it. The sun and Pluto. But then we have this story of Venus and Jupiter conjuncting at the last degree of Taurus. And that is really setting the stage for where the full moon is going, because Sagittarius, as you well know, is ruled by Jupiter. So we have this energy of the two benefics kissing in the sky as we get to the full moon, which I think I'm on right now. So let me just go ahead and put this up because I think we can sum up this whole period in relation to the full moon. So, thoughts. Sagittarius full moon, ruled by Jupiter at the last degree of Taurus with Venus conjunct, and then the luminaries trining or flowing with Pluto. Thoughts?
Yeah, what are my thoughts? I mean, I think the judgment card in these types of scenarios, it's very kind of like what what is your I mean, I guess in Taurus too, it kind of adds like a little bit of a flair for changed perspectives. Like, I guess I really want to use myself anecdotally in a way that's really vulnerable. Can I? Are we okay with that?
Well, I did pull vulnerability and humor today
Oh,
as my
oh, great.
my empowerment card. So I think that's very fitting.
Those are my favorite subjects, I think, vulnerability and humor. Like, how can we
Perfect.
laugh at our vulnerability? So, I'm recently not married anymore. And what's really interesting is that Jupiter was in Gemini the year that I was married.
Oh.
And very interesting. So a lot of this kind of energy was happening that year for me on a personal level. Um, I feel like at my core, I was never supposed to be married. South Node in the eighth house in Placidus, Chiron in the eighth house in whole signs. I inherently was born into this world not wanting kids, not wanting marriage, and seeing myself as a very like free spirit. I end up getting married and I love it. I love everything about it. Loved being a wife, loved marriage, loved so much about the traditional like male female dynamic in a way that I didn't expect. Now that I'm not married anymore, this energy that I felt was more inherent to me, which is the free spirit, don't lock me down. You know, it's more Aquarian. It's very like, you know, I'm open to multiple situations versus tradition, those types of things. I feel like I'm getting more reflective on what my core values are to what my soul feels, not necessarily what society feels, not necessarily what I've already been through, not what, you know, is being modeled to me, but just kind of what I inherently feel. And I think that Jupiter and Taurus, you know, maybe we're in a position where we're reflecting on those things in terms of what we feel is grounding or tangible or kind of solid. Jupiter and Gemini is a very different energy than Jupiter and Taurus, you know.
Yes.
I think that the Jupiter and Taurus journey for me, I was a housewife most of it, and I was in the most comfortable kind of comfort zone that I've ever been in, but in a way that didn't feel comfortable to me. And Jupiter and Gemini, I think, is an opportunity for us to expand kind of beyond maybe where we've been comfortable, you know, because that story is ending. But I think that this last, like this anaretic degree point with the full moon energy, when I think of the Sagittarius moon, for me, a Sag moon is always, you know, about feeling like you're reflecting on what you're in alignment with in your soul, you know, like
Mm.
what spiritually feels in alignment for you, you know, outside of what you're being told is society's projection. You know, for some people, it's like you fall into a religion or a spiritual practice. For others, you fall out, right? Like there might be, you know, maybe some kind of belief system you've had that you're no longer in alignment with, or vice versa. So I think that this is kind of one of those pivotal moments in a lot of people's lives to choose a different path. And I think that this energy around May 23rd is kind of bringing all of that to the surface and kind of having us really reflect on that, especially in, you know, with Venus relationship dynamics. So
Hmm.
relationship dynamics and relation to resources, right? Financial stability, how we're managing our resources, and you know, maybe we enter into a new state of being with it once this shift happens.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get what you're saying in the terms of like, it's almost like sort of passing the baton in some way in our life because I see the two stories, right? We have the sun, the moon, and Pluto all at these early degrees of signs that have to do with the thought process, with fixed perspectives, with beliefs and outlooks on the journey of life, you know? And I like to think of early degrees as the beginner's mind, kind of like what I was bringing up earlier.
Yeah.
And so the beginner's mind is getting this big picture view of life, which Sag loves to bring us. What are we searching for? Or what do we see our future? What are we optimistic about in that is growing in our lives? And it is it is colored by this perspective of the very last degree of fixed Earth with Venus and Jupiter. It's almost like it's almost like a retrospect. You know how like when your life flashes before your eyes, right before if you're having like a near
Yeah.
death experience or something, you're going to see everything that you've manifested up until this point. And so there's this element of kind of what you were saying too about this reconnecting with the sense of value, and maybe even doing a value check. Like what have you valued? What have you accumulated? What have you grown? What were your desires? And then how is that story wrapping up in a way to invite you into this whole new perspective that can be very different and challenging. We did a whole spiel on Pluto and Aquarius energy being, I know the way I look at things. This
Yeah.
is my view. But this adaptability is coming in to like light up the perspective of these fixed principles that are now getting ready to change, right? I mean, Venus is uh I'm like trying to do the math, Mel. 21 minutes away from getting into Gemini. Jupiter's only got a few days left. Um, there are big changes that are about to shift. And so I totally agree. Like, where's your head at? What do you want? What are you looking for in life? What do you value? What do you desire? How is that changing? And be flexible with it all. That's how I feel about this full moon. Um, it's kind of
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think too, what popped into my head that's anecdotal, but I also feel like I've seen it in a few other friends of mine is that Venus and Taurus uh is such a like the expression of, how you take care of yourself or like your health and your beauty kind of stuff.
mm,
And I feel like so many people in my life are kind of redefining the way that they put themselves together, And I think that maybe there's the physical quality too in a very, personal way, like how you
yeah.
adorn yourself or love yourself, those types of themes too.
100%. I'm feeling that in my own life right now as I go through all
Really?
these yeah, as I go through as you get older, your body needs different care
Mhm.
than it used to, and I'm realizing, oh, if I had started doing this younger, or if I only had valued this and had this self-care
Yeah.
regime, then maybe I wouldn't be dealing with this now. But there is this journey to especially for cancer, right? That's the
Yeah.
sign that is about learning how to nurture, I mean, others, yeah, but really the self, how do you
Yeah.
care for the self? And so these are big lessons that I've been going through right now, but it really ties into what you were just saying, how it can be physical adornment, it can be the beauty on the outside, but it's how do you really, yeah, care for the body, the
The
mind and the
temple.
soul, the
Yeah.
temple, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Our body is our temple.
Totally.
Now, one other thing we got to point out, just because it's happening, is that really with this full moon, we're starting to feel the energy of Mars come in. Because if you see Mars here over at 17 degrees of Aries, it's really at the midpoint right now between the North Node itself and the eclipse degree. And really Chiron, you see Chiron hanging out there too. So that Mars is really firing up some of that eclipse energies. So you might start to see these different stories, like I mean, life is definitely not it's very rare that we're just focused on one thing in our life. We have these like little side stories and these side characters and everything. And so this whole Aries story is really starting to ramp up too. In its own way. It might not be the bright light perception of the full moon, but this could be a side story that is in service to how the mind is changing, the beliefs changing. Because ultimately Aries is once again back to the beginner, maybe not the beginner's mind, but that impetus to have new beginnings in life and to start fresh. So that is exciting. Maybe a little volatile, but also exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right. Well, we have made it through the full moon. A lot happens out the get-go with this Gemini season. So let us carry on and let's do. Okay, so basically, the first things that happen right after the full moon is just what we were saying. Venus moves into Gemini. Um, I think actually later that day on the 23rd after the full
Yeah, it
moon.
does.
Yeah.
Yep.
So she immediately moves in there. And then we have Jupiter moves in on, I think that's actually the 25th, even though we're looking at the 26th.
That's
And then,
correct. Yeah.
and yeah, and then we have, so we have those two that just switched over. And then now Mars is officially on the eclipse point. So right after that full moon, there is a big shift that takes place. So let us talk. I want to pick your mind on Venus and Gemini, which you already talked about her being the esoteric ruler of the sign, but what do you, and the sociable component of Venus and Gemini. But is there anything else you want to add to her, especially in relation to Taurus? Because it seems like a big shift.
Yeah, it is a big shift. I mean, I just think of the kind of conjunction of self, I guess, the esoteric kind of alchemical process of conjunction. So we have the upper triangle, and the lower triangle, and how when we have the lower triangle and the upper triangle meeting in the heart space, which, heart chakra is ruled by Venus, we experience that kind of unification of self. So I feel like the esoteric side of me with Venus and Gemini is very much like this is such a positive time to do healing work around your triangles. So if you don't know what your triangles are, it's the Star of David, which the Star of David was actually adopted from Hindu, um, the Anahata symbol, which the Anahata symbol has the Star of David in it. So in, the seven chakras in Hinduism, we have the lower triangle, which is your root chakra, sacral chakra, and solar plexus. And then we have the heart chakra in the center, and then it goes up into your upper triangle, which is the throat, the third eye, and the crown chakra. And a lot of times we are, we could have dusty chakras, maybe there's a chakra in particular that needs our attention. It could be multiple chakras that need our attention, or it could be a whole area of the body. Anecdotally, I have spent most of my life very disconnected from my lower triangle. So I've had to
Mm,
work really hard on connecting to my solar sacral and root. Like I've had to do a lot of work with that lower triangle. You can do tarot readings that will tell you kind of what's happening within your chakras. And for me, like talking about Venus and Gemini, I get so esoteric with it just because at this point, that's what it represents for me.
mhm.
When I am connecting with that energy on a more mundane level, or, maybe mundane's the wrong word, but more of like a day-to-day kind of connecting to the energy. My God, it's so hard for me to not like, it's probably my Leo. I just always think about it through the lens of my experience. And I think it is such a social energy to me in terms of communicating. It's really good for like Gemini being ruled by Mercury, ruling the third house and kind of like the analytical mind. It's such a powerful energy for any kind of creative projects that have to do with the word or the
Mm.
mind. It's a great science-y kind of energy, like fact-based work. I think it's a really good opportunity to connect with that side of yourself and with others through that. Like, you have your Tarot of Her project kind of launching the pre-orders and sharing this art project. Like there's the like you did all the words and then you have the artist and you guys are sharing this labor of love during this time period. And that to me is such a symbol of Venus and Gemini too, like kind of having that out in the world.
Spreading the word, right?
Yeah.
For the record, I want to start a band called Dusty Chakras, because
I'm in.
I was like, that really just has a ring to it, you know. I already hear I already hear the glass bowls and the gongs in the background.
Oh, I'm so into it.
Dusty Chakras. But you know what? And we're going to really run with this theme of what you're talking about here, especially as we go on and we get to the point where Venus conjuncts the sun, because I think your esoteric leaning of that meaning is very important when, for her, when she's about to be rebirthed within all this energy. So if we do have dusty chakras, if we are disconnected from the heart, or if because we are in territory with Venus and Gemini, where she is very tied to the mind at this point. And so, yeah, we can spread the word. Yeah, we can create conversations in our partnerships. Do we need to talk about things? Do we need to sort of have these discussions or these loving debates of coming together and seeing each side that, each person brings to the table? Do we need a little freedom to entertain different areas of our love life or our creative process? There is essentially Gemini. What does Gemini love? Taurus loves the need of comfort and certainty. Gemini loves the uncertainty and the variety of life, right? So there is this switch from needing certainty, needing comfort, to realizing, you know what? Variety is the spice of life. I like a little bit of uncertainty. And I think we're going to go back and forth a little bit, because there is going to be this, mutual reception, even though they're in aversion to one another, right? So there is sort of, they're not necessarily talking, but they are in their own way, of Mercury and Venus together, because Mercury is still in Taurus. So wait till Mercury gets in Gemini, though. That'll be a thing. So dusty chakras, yeah. I'm reserving. Nobody take it. Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. All right. So there we have it. We have Venus now in Gemini. So we're going to see that shift in the whole social dynamic and the inner dynamic. We have Jupiter in Gemini, which I feel like we've talked about a little bit. I mean, I probably should do a whole podcast on Jupiter and Gemini now that I think about it.
Yeah,
It would deserve a whole podcast.
it does.
Um, but let's just spend maybe like 3 or so minutes talking about let's get the facts. It is Gemini season after all.
Yeah.
The facts. Jupiter and Gemini. Jupiter is in its detriment in Gemini, right? We like label the planet, oh, it's in its detriment. What does that mean? It is the farthest away from home that it could possibly be. Jupiter is now in Mercury's territory, where it's thinking about all the things. It's ramping up, all the communications, all the news cycle, all the opinions, all the learning, what else is it ramping up? What's Jupiter ramping up? What am I
Analysis
missing?
paralysis.
Yes. Yes.
Anxiety.
Anxiety.
Overthinking.
Anxiety is the spice of life. It's actually really funny when we think, because I am someone who suffers from anxiety. I will be vulnerable with my here self and say that I got Uranus on the ascendant. I'm an anxious person. Let's be real.
I am too.
So, okay, we got two anxious people in the room right here. Anxiety is so funny when you think about how we get there, how we work up the whirlwind, what we're thinking about. If I want to be really honest, a lot of times anxiety is a very selfish thing.
Yeah.
Or not self, I don't know if selfish is quite the word, but it's really got this solar quality of like the whole world revolves around me and I'm anxious because of this, perspective that I have stirred up within my own brain about like what's going on and its relevance to me and how that can be
Yeah.
harming or hurtful, and it's a lot. And so how do we get the Jupiterian perspective side, the pulling back to get to the bigger picture of why that whirlwind's going on? How do we get there?
Is this rhetorical or you want me to
It's
try to
very
answer
rhetorical, but if you have an answer, I will
that?
100% take it. I'm like, and Elisa, can you be my therapist for a second? And
I mean, I'm really good at like like armchair psychology stuff.
all right, yeah.
I could probably fake my way through that one. I mean, I've been working a lot of, I worked with a therapist on that. I think anxiety is so complex, right? Because you have the somatic stuff, and then you have this is the triangle. This is the upper and lower triangle with the
Mm,
anxiety spectrum. You've got the upper triangle that has the logic path, but then you have the somatic memory of where maybe the root of the anxiety is lying, right? And
yes.
it's almost like if you don't, for me, my anxiety, a lot of it, even if I go down a logic path of I shouldn't have anxiety for all these reasons, when I'm in the environment, I'm physically having a response to the environment, even if I'm not consciously engaging with it. And it's taken me having to uncover all of those things to learn what is causing the anxiety. So that's been an interesting journey. I think it's very Pisces moon in the third house in Placidus specifically, because I absorb my environment in a very, I mean, just Pisces moon in general, but
Yeah.
um,
Whatever
yeah,
environment
like,
you're absorbing.
well, and learning too, like, oh, that's that person's anxiety I'm absorbing, not my own,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But like, for example, I was having panic attacks for years without even knowing it was happening. Because my panic attacks were not these like overt, like when you hear panic attack, you think of like somebody hyperventilating and breathing in a bag and crying and having this like meltdown. I've had those. I was having the type of panic attack that's happening somatically while everything seems to be fine. And I had no idea. And what would happen is I'd go to bed, and this is very Pisces moon. I'd wake up, I'd have nightmares and be having the actual like crying and falling apart. Like I'd be waking up doing that from my dreams. And so it was like this very complex kind of thing. And it was actually somebody like that I worked with actually told me that they were panic attacks. And later I did like all this reading about it. But what would happen to me, like when I was in cosmetology school, is I would just be super nauseous and dizzy all the time.
Mm,
And I didn't understand why. I would zone out. I wasn't able to take information in properly. And it slowed me down in my academic process. I also wasn't taking very good care of myself in terms of, I was young and I was drinking a lot. But um, I learned later in life, because this stuff was still happening even when I was sober, that was a cause of panic attacks. Was like if you're having a somatic panic attack and your conscious mind isn't aware of it, it manifests in those physical symptoms.
mm.
And so I think that's kind of where, when I started doing a lot of spiritual work on like connecting my lower to my upper, it was all like uncovering this whole world that I had had so separate in myself for so long. And I think that's also something that is really interesting about the anxiety story for a lot of us, is like, oh, my logical mind can say this is something I shouldn't be afraid of, but my body is freaking out.
Has different opinion.
Yeah, my body's
Yeah.
like, alert, alert.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
the flight or fight or flight, right? Yeah, that's interesting as you were breaking it all down, because it once again gets to the core of all these layers, right? That's so many layers, cognitive layers that go and sink into the sediment of who we are in our psyches. And on the surface, it doesn't make sense to have the anxiety or the phobia or the fear or what have you. And no one's immune. I mean, even someone's like, "Oh, I'm not afraid of everything, anything." They're afraid of something.
Yeah, there's
So
always a fear of something.
you gotta have a fear of something. Um, but letting those fears rule without getting to the bottom of the cognitive process that does get layered into the somatic state. And so I have a feeling that cognitive behavioral therapy will probably be of great benefit to a lot of people, not just during Gemini season, but also during while Jupiter is in Gemini. Like if you want to unpack some of these these 8, 9, and 10 of swords that we were talking about earlier, like this is the chance to talk it through with someone, to read material that helps to see a higher perspective, and to get to sort of what you were talking about, the spiritual bridge that helps take that anxiety or that what's been so rooted in the problem for so long and make the connection. Like you were saying, it was a disconnect from being up here and I needed to get down here in my spiritual triangle. How do we bridge that with information and talking through things? So but at the start of it, it's gonna probably ramp up a little bit. So I guess that maybe that's what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Oh,
um
totally.
And then a lot of people will be saying everything, like me right now. I got Mercury conjunct Jupiter natally. I can take a 30-second point and make it like a 10-minute point.
Yeah. Which us mutable people like, we like to see things from different perspectives and analyze it in different ways. We like to ask the questions, the whys, and see it from many different vantage points. It makes us feel smart.
I like feeling smart.
I
Oh.
like feeling smart too, Melissa.
Yeah, I like, but what is the term? It's like the man who says the most is the fool, and we'll say the person who says the most is the fool. The person who says the least is the wise one.
Yep. That's
So
what they say. But you know
that's
what
what
I've learned? I've learned that a lot of people that choose to be silent. Okay, this is so bad. I don't feel like I should say this on air. My mom and I had a whole discussion about this once where it's like a lot of times there'll be like this really mysterious, quiet, sexy person in the corner, and you're like, ooh, they must be so smart. And then you get to know them, and it's almost like, no, there's just nothing there.
it's a
So
crapshoot. You don't know what you're gonna. I've
you
been there. I
really
know what you're talking
don't.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. And that's okay. That's okay. Like we're all at different levels of growth and understanding, and no judgment, but I think that there's some people that are trying to play it off like there's more depth than there actually is. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
Smoke and
I hear
mirrors.
you.
That's
Smoke and
wise too,
mirrors.
maybe. I don't know. But Mercury is a trickster. So I guess
That's
that
right.
plays into it. There's a whole trickster element to this that we haven't even
I
acknowledged.
I know we haven't. We have not even talked about the role of the trickster. Um which is actually pretty funny when you think about it, like what could possibly, I mean, when we think about Jupiter and Gemini in general, we got a whole, year or so of it. And so there is going to be, I feel like it's like the card in the Animal deck by Colette Baron Reed. And it's a coyote and it says,
Mhm.
trust in divine detours. And so the trickster loves to redirect, especially in a mercurial fashion, in a mutable fashion, redirect the storyline or the path essentially. And so I feel like there's going to be a lot of divine detours with Jupiter in Gemini, based on whatever comes up for people, whatever area of that the chart is for you. And divine detours are not necessarily bad. Like there is no bad or good. That's once again, we're assigning some sort of definition to what happens or some sort of belief. But the trickster energy is definitely going to be prevalent, and especially at this time we got to keep in mind at the end of May here, especially with these ingresses. May 25th, May 26th. When does Jupiter, I think Jupiter trines Pluto in early June, around June 3rd-ish, etc. Mars is on the eclipse degree. There is a sense of divine detours and tricks and just headlines coming into play that you're like, what? What's
Yeah.
happening? So I think be prepared for that. And be adaptable, be flexible, even though Mercury and Taurus is like, oh, so we'll see. Anyways, in the interest of saving time, we could be here all day for this. But uh, while this is all happening, actually, during the end of May, we also have Mercury getting to the middle of Taurus and making a sextile to Saturn. So, as this all is going down, there is that level of, I guess we could say, level-headedness. Well, I don't know how level-headed Pisces is, but Saturn, the Saturn element, there's a very formative element. We bring water and earth together. There's this
Yeah.
formative energy. But I think Mercury and sextiling Saturn does help stabilize a little bit of this big burst into Gemini and then adding Pluto on top of it. Um, but only for a little bit because Mercury's on its way to Uranus. So enjoy the Saturn vibes while you can. Saturn will be back. Saturn is going to be a major player, I think, in our new moon. So hold on to the hat for that. Uh, and we might actually need Mercury Saturn energy to help us with Mars Chiron. That is going to happen on May 29th. So Mars is going to conjunct Chiron near that eclipse degree. And so that could be a little volatile as far as Mars and Chiron go. I mean, any thoughts on Chiron energy and how it's been lit up lately in Aries? Maybe Mars being there. Any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, yeah, I do. I was kind of looking into Mars when it was hitting Chiron last. That was in 2022, and I honestly don't really like I really need to sit and think back to my own life of what was happening during that time. I think I wrote it down just to look back on, but it was like the middle of 2022. Let me see. What did I say? Mars conjunct Chiron in Aries on June 15th, 2022, and Mercury was also in Gemini during that time. So I know that year was really hard for me. So I'm kind of trying to just remember what I was working through. But, Chiron and Aries wounds around identity and your perception of self or your relationship to self. We've had so much energy pass over this Chiron and just hit this over and over and over again. And then I think Mars here, some of the things that I was reading was that you feel protective of yourself. You feel almost like there's a dichotomy between like wanting to defend your wounds. Like,
Mm,
this is my pain point. Like, you know how like people like you're either going to feel victimized about something the rest of your life, or you're going to have it be a point of empowerment where you're going to work on healing it and it's going to make you a better, stronger person. I think
yeah.
I was reading something where it was kind of like this Mars Chiron conjunction can kind of do that, where it's like you're either going to defend your position to continue to be a victim of your narrative, or you're going to find a way out in terms of trying to like fight beyond the story or fight beyond the wounding. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective. And if I think back to 2022, I think that I fell into more of a victim headspace. And I do feel like in this next version of self, I feel like I'm trying to fight beyond that narrative. So maybe there's some kind of full circle there for myself. Are you going to pull that chart up?
No, it's actually really interesting what you're saying in relation to the next lunar event that happens, because the next day on May 30th, we have that last quarter moon in
Mm-hmm.
Pisces. And so when you're to me, as you're talking about this sort of like victim mentality and these kind of stories that we choose to tell ourselves, like this is a turning point. I'll add Venus in here too.
Oh,
This
yeah.
feels like a turning point to those sort of those spiritual narratives, and these stories that we tell ourselves, especially from this emotional place that taps into this pain point. And they might not be interlinked exactly by degree or anything like that, but when these things simultaneously happen, um, especially, let's add this in Mercury conjunct Uranus at this time too. When we think about the sort of
Yeah, it's
this
a big
mental
deal.
liberation, yeah, there's a lot going on right
Kind of a big
here.
deal day,
Yeah, around May 30th, especially this kind of turning point.
Yeah.
So to really lean into what you're just saying, I think that you're onto something here. So which path will we choose, the lovers? What will we choose? That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know that I'm already in fight mode versus victim mode, but 2022, like I was totally licking my wounds, and it's just, I think, different for everybody where you're kind of at in your own story. But yeah, it's a lot. Mutable square energy, as somebody that has it like very inherently to my beingness, it's really hard not to overthink all of the sides of why something happened in your life. And that can create the analysis paralysis in your own healing journey. And one of the things my dad said to me back in December when I was kind of going down a rabbit hole of like, what did I do that's wrong? Like he said, you can't self-help, or he told me you're going to self-help yourself into a mental institution or something like that. Like he was like saying that I was over analyzing how to self-help, and he was like, at some
Mm,
point you have to just stop and almost like more of like the AA kind of like acceptance, kind of
yeah.
thing where like you're in that kind of serenity prayer and you have to just do and be and accept, and you can't continue to like really dissect all of the different ways that you might have done something wrong, or if it had just been different, and I get really in trouble for the shoulda, woulda, coulda, but the shoulda, woulda, coulda thing for me is almost like that Virgo Mercury that wants to problem solve so that I mitigate it in the future. Like, oh
Mm,
no, this whole thing just happened and now I'm here. So I need to go analyze everything that's happened in the past so that I don't create that in the future. And how do I grow and evolve so that I'm better in the future, And so I think that kind of mutable thing that, I'm looking at that moon square to the sun specifically with the Mercury conjunct Uranus. It's really, we're prone to these kinds of big, you know, assessments of self. And for better or worse, there's some people that really need to do that work and they do not do it.
mm.
And you're like, please get into therapy and start pulling everything apart, please, for the love of God. And then there's those of us that pull everything apart to an exhausting place, and we just need to stop and recognize and ground. So it's definitely going to be different for everybody, but those are major themes, I feel like, for this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. The term fixing it till it's broke kind of came up in my
Yeah.
mind where um I remember having a client once where she was just so over the self-help. She's like, the self-help isn't helping anymore because it never
Yeah.
ends. It just keeps going.
Yeah.
And like how much do you play into that versus this really a key word that you brought up that I really think speaks to the Pisces moon energy is the acceptance. Like we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to figure it all out. We can be headed in the right direction for what feels right to us without having all the bits and pieces and the whys and the I know it and this is the certainty. I mean, whenever I think about especially squares between Gemini and Pisces, because what's going to happen? We're going to have this last quarter moon, and then the moon is going to basically roll over Saturn. It's going to sextile that Mercury Uranus bit, but then it's going to roll over Neptune. And the difficulty between Gemini and Pisces is really this need for certainty versus life being a complete mystery and you just don't know. You know, you just
Yeah.
gotta just be with it, accept it, transcend what is, as cliche as that sounds. And come from more of this spiritualized place of just accepting this weird the Maya, the illusion of what life is versus this
Yeah.
trying to pinpoint everything exactly to make ourselves better and to have all our little pieces and of the puzzle into place. I think that's where Mercury can help a little bit here with the Uranus component because we've had Jupiter go over Uranus, we've had Venus do it, the Sun, Mercury, it's not the last planet to do it. Mars will eventually get there, but having our mind hit this point of like this destabilizing place where you can break apart and liberate some of this stuckness, especially when it comes to patterns of being, or maybe what you were talking about earlier about somatic buildup, you know,
Yeah.
getting a grip on that and letting that break apart. So yes, interesting lineup for sure. And it essentially sends us into, the dark phase of the moon. So, in interest of saving time, we're going to do a sort of, I'm just going to lay out what's going to happen and we're going to think about what this means. So, let's clear our chart here. And so, past last quarter, we are essentially going to have Mercury's doing a lot of stuff. Uh, well, it's going to conjunct Uranus. We're going to have Jupiter make the trine to Pluto on this June 2nd, which is a Sunday. Then we're going to have Mercury is going to basically sextile Neptune at the end of Pisces, ingress into Gemini, which is definitely going to be a big shift. I've already kind of gone forward here. Ingress into Gemini. I'm way ahead of myself on Monday. So the start of the week, June 3rd, we're going to have this whole, shift of mercurial energy. And then it's basically going to conjunct Jupiter and trine Pluto. So it's going to light up this whole configuration, which is then going to take us into June 4th is a big day because we have Mercury, Jupiter, Pluto action. You got the moon on Uranus, a balsamic moon on Uranus, and we have the Venus cazimi all taking place right before the new moon in Gemini. So I know that's a lot to digest, but if we were to let's sum that up. I mean, what's the first thing that comes
Ah.
to mind when you I know you're like, I have 5 million words and none at all. Um,
Kinda, yeah. I mean, maybe that sums it up.
actually that does kind of,
It
yeah,
does.
it does.
Yeah.
It's everything and nothing all at once. My gosh, the perspectives, the perspectives. I feel like there's a lot of breakthrough and aha moments. It feels like a roller coaster ride to me, a little bit of like what's going on, maybe in the outer world, but really also just within ourselves of like thinking all the things, having all the ideas, putting all the data into place, maybe feeling a lot of anxiety, where to put that anxiety, doing some yoga, doing some breath
I
work.
really love the beginner's mind tagline that you have here because this feels in alignment for me, at least, like in terms of just being like, it feels very Page of Swords to me. Like, I personally am in a state where I feel like I'm ready to absorb a bunch of new information and learn a bunch of new things. And it would be really hard for me to think that that's not a collective thing that we're all experiencing right now with these transits. And it might all be different areas of our lives that we're feeling that way, but I'm witnessing it in people. I feel like we are in this huge collective shift, and so many people are having to reflect on that Taurus, what was comfortable. You and I did the Uranus and Taurus podcast back when Uranus entered Taurus, and
Mm.
we talked so long about getting, comfortable, getting uncomfortable. And I feel like these transits with Pluto into Aquarius and this Jupiter Gemini energy with all of this is really like we got so uncomfortable the last however many years, and we're just like 10 of swords in it, gonna jump off the cliff and go into beginner's mind, and we're gonna just say, okay, I'm ready to learn. And of course, there's the other side of it where there's the know-it-alls that want to be the ones to disseminate the wisdom or the
Lead the
facts or the
way.
information. Yeah, that want to lead the way. Yeah. So I think that there will be a lot of that too, which is fine. We need the teacher student relationship in that
Yes.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where maybe some of the discernment comes in, especially at this
Mhm.
time when everybody has I can only imagine that talking points and talking heads are probably going to be pretty, probably going to be 5 million course launches. Or
Aren't we
at
in an
least after
election year
the
too?
We are in an election year. Yes,
Yeah. So
that is a
I don't like
fact.
to talk about politics in my astrology practice, but we'll just throw in a little bit of there's
Yes.
politics stuff going on this year.
There is definitely politics stuff going on. And he actually, spoiler alert, Jupiter, when Jupiter goes retrograde in Gemini, it's actually going to be conjunct the Mars in Gemini in the US's chart. And we're going to have Mars retrograde later during the right after the whole election. And yeah, the US chart is pretty lit up when it comes to both Mars action and Jupiter action. So expect more of that. Uh, really, I was thinking right before we started this podcast, I was like, okay, Jupiter and Gemini. I'm like, when have we experienced something? Like, when's the last time we got a big dose of this? And it really was the North Node in Gemini, which
Interesting.
really lit up, all those eclipses. So what was that? 20, that was 2020 or 2021? 20, when did the North Node
That
move into
sounds
Gemini?
right. I think it was
Uh,
2020.
I think it was 2020. It was just later on, maybe.
Yeah,
This
because I
is
remember being all weirded out by that nodal axis with, I think it's Gemini and Sagittarius rule the breath and breathing out process. And I remember thinking that was really bizarre with the COVID stuff that the nodes were in
yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually it looks like May 5th, 2020. Yeah, so I
Yep.
mean, when we think about obviously the world was in a much different place, there was a lot going on, but just to think, I was like, when was the last time we got a big dose of Gemini? And because obviously Jupiter and Gemini is going to give us a big dose of Gemini, especially since it's going to square Saturn in Pisces. And I think that's going to bring up a lot once again of like trying to get this certainty and trying to go with the mystery of like how life is not about certainty whatsoever and how we navigate that space. But I guess that's a talk for a different time. So let us go back to what year am I even in? What day we were on June 4th. Mark your calendars, people. I think this is going to be a very significant time, especially since we have Venus doing the rebirth process, essentially with her conjunction with the sun. I mean, this is big news. It's not every day that she makes this, especially a superior conjunction. So um, it really brings me back in my mind to what you were talking about with that union, that lover's energy, and that union
Mhm.
with the self. Um, I just saw there's the beginner's mind, the innocent standing
Oh,
on the
yeah.
cliff, about to jump off, right?
Yeah.
I mean safely jump off, like don't.
Yeah. We don't mean kill yourself, jump
No,
off.
we don't we don't mean, or I hear that people say on TikTok, unlive yourself.
Oh, yeah. I've heard
You've been
that too.
unlived.
Unliked. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't agree with that though. This is where my like mutability comes in and I see too many I argue with myself and others in this really annoying way, but my perspective of energy doesn't die. So I don't think that un, I don't believe it's unliving yourself. Like you're still gonna go
It's been
on.
unlived. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still living. You're
I believe that you are just entering a different realm. I like transition, but I know that's different. Like suicide and then transition, it feels more in alignment than unaliving because unaliving feels like an atheist like finality term to me. That's
mm.
just how I feel somatically with it. I'm not saying that everyone needs to have that perspective. I just somatically in my body, it feels not in alignment for me with what death is.
And I mean, I don't know why they say it. It could be something with the algorithm too, like depending
Yeah,
on, because I know a lot of people have to, which is interesting, getting clever with your words, since we are speaking
that's
about Gemini,
true.
as we,
Yeah.
how we communicate, and what is accepted, how the algorithm, filters it, how it, uh, tags it or, flags it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
probably where it came from. You're right. It probably was an algorithm shadow
so
ban
yeah.
avoidant thing. Yeah.
So who knows? Probably more of that to come. But then we got, so let's spend a couple minutes before we get to the new moon. Just thinking about this Venus Sun conjunction, because it really speaks, especially I love Sarah's lover's rendition here of like,
Yeah.
because one of the things I love about the lovers, or the idea of duality and coming up against the paradox of two vision points, or ideas, or especially when we get stuck in it, is that if we rise above it, there's like always a third option. And so it makes me wonder if this kind of sense of wholeness and this unity in her rebirth process, where we'll be at this point where we thought we had these two sides, but as we come together, this unity pops off this third option that we couldn't have seen yet until we had a seat with the sun. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking about like being receptive to a third option that we didn't know existed quite yet.
Yeah, I
As
like that.
um we do have to keep in mind that this is all happening in a square to Saturn, so just
Yeah. Woohoo.
FYI. Woo, yeah, how about that? Um Actually, I think this is, let's go to the new moon. So, we're leaving our June 4th, the day of many things, the day of many transits, to our new moon on June 6th. So here we have a lineup of the moon, the sun, Venus. Everybody, actually, let me get rid of that real quick. Oh, everybody's partying in Venus's term. So that's interesting. And then this lunation is essentially square Saturn in Pisces. Oh, my circle drawing's not the best there. We got Mars at the tail end of Aries, which is always fun. Mars, just FYI, getting close to Taurus, where it's going to square Pluto. So we have this Mars Pluto tension brewing, but just FYI. Um, and then, of course, everything is ruled by this Mercury Jupiter action. So it all comes down to Mercury in Gemini, essentially, who's not combust the sun yet. It hasn't gone, it still can see some things, but it is under the beams. So what's your take on this new moon energy, especially with the square to Saturn? Because to me, this feels very much like a precursor to Jupiter Saturn energy coming. But what are your thoughts?
Well, the thing, like, as somebody in recovery, I have a really hard time not making this about kind of your relationship to your perspectives around escapism and how you choose to escape in healthy ways versus unhealthy ways. So for me, like, there's a tension that's been brewing for me around wanting to start smoking again.
Oh,
And
interesting.
my mom started smoking again. And like there that whole side of my family is smoking, and it's like in the ether, and I'm around a lot of people who are smoking, and I haven't smoked in almost 9 years, like it's just I don't want to start smoking again. Like my lungs have regenerated at this point. Like I'm
Yeah.
very like, in this, but so I keep kind of trying to channel my need for escapism into all my creative projects, like I'm writing, I'm painting, I'm working on music, and I'm trying to avoid unhealthy like relationship dynamics or substance abuse. But I've definitely like devolved in certain ways that I was taking care of myself. Like I've gotten a little bit fuck it with my diet routine and things like that, like my food and stuff. So
Hmm.
I think for me, like, I can't tell if this square, is going to challenge some of those desires in a way where I feel more fuck it, like some of us might feel like I see a lot of people in recovery where there's these hard aspects or these kind of afflictions happening in Piscean energy, especially where it's a lot more easy for them to make up excuses about relapsing in different ways with different things, not necessarily drugs and alcohol, but yes, drugs and alcohol, changing perspectives around that. I kind of
Yeah.
think about too, like chasing the romantic feeling versus looking at the facts. So I've held spiritual counsel for a lot of people when they're in a new relationship where, we get really caught up on how somebody makes us feel
Mm.
versus what they are on paper or what the facts are. And I think the Piscean aspect, is obviously how this makes me feel, or the fantasy or the illusion of it. And maybe the Gemini is more of the analytical, what does it look like on paper,
Yeah.
And there's value in both, right? Like, because the evolved Pisces is following an intuitive thing, right? Not just a escapism thing. And I think that some of us are more evolved in knowing that difference than others. I feel very evolved in my intuitive part of life at this point. Escapism is not attractive to me in an overt way. Under the surface, in my unevolved sense of self, it's fun to entertain, but when I play out the reality of it, it's definitely not. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not
Goes
20 and I
south
don't need
quick.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't need those consequences. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
And that's my analytical mind, that wants to look at it in a more fact-based way. But then you can also overthink and over assess, and Gemini Pisces is really good at that as well. So, and obviously new moons are a chance for us to set intentions over something new that we want to call in. And with Venus in here, that could be relationship dynamics, that could be communication and relationship dynamics, perspective shifts, like maybe the way that we seek spiritual fulfillment and pleasure, um, and how we analyze that or absorb it is changing in some fashion, or we want it to change in
Mm.
some way. I think the way I feel today, I don't know how I'm going to feel on June 6th, but the way I feel today is very much like I want that. So maybe by that time period where that square is happening, it'll, squares to me feel like something needs to change. It is changing. It doesn't feel good necessarily, but that friction, it's like I'm ready to make that kind of push towards that, so
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what the square is. It's got that crossroad energy to
yep.
where it doesn't have the ability to synthesize. It sort of has to be one or the other. And it's interesting with Saturn overcoming everything, like in the overcoming position. So even though we have this pile up in Gemini and we got Mercury in Gemini, Saturn just in the zodiacal order is overcoming the whole thing. So even if we are in this place of understanding and we're piecing out all the facts or we're trying to escape the Saturn itself, we might be able to do that in the beginning. But I think the element of what Saturn's lesson is or what it's asking of us, is it will catch up over time,
Yeah.
even if it's a delayed response. But when you were speaking, it just had me thinking about the power of justification.
Oh yeah.
What's justified? What
Yeah.
is, and our mind loves to get us in that position. Oh, mine's got a great argument. I'm justified in thinking this, or I'm justified in doing this. And this could be a completely bad decision for me. Or, think about the idea of
Yeah.
smoking, or
Yeah.
whatever, or going with a relationship that you saw like all the red flags, but you're like, you know what? We'll see how this goes. Because as humans, especially if you have a Gemini Sagittarius bent, you probably like to justify things. And so having this whole lunation come down basically to that, at least the major players. I mean, Mars is still in its own sign, so it's doing its own thing, but all the other planets are under this strong Mercury that's like, okay, well, I've got my arguments. I can debate this. I've got this whole reasoning set out. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is let Saturn come in enough to color the reasoning, not in a way that's depressing or in a way that you feel like you don't have the agency to, have the variety or the lightness in your that you want in your life. This does feel very like puer senex kind of energy, like the idea of like the Peter Pan energy versus like the old wise man, which are you gonna be? Are you going to be the naive side, or are you going to be the curmudgeon? I don't really mean a curmudgeon, but
The crone.
the crone. The crone, because it has this old young energy. It's like this battle
Yeah.
of old and young, which could be like a literal thing. Who knows? In the world, but that's kind of like there's this fresh energy, but there's this old energy, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier. As we evolve into this next space, it's like how do we evolve into all this technology and all these new just this new reality that is emerging. But how do we keep that bit of the old? How do we keep what's form and functional? Um, so there seems to be a little bit of that at play too. But I could be reading too much into it, which is very Gemini.
I guess it just depends. Like those of us that are so mutable, I think experience that way. And then I'm always kind of curious in my non-mutable people how it's affecting them. And it does feel like they're a lot more ungrounded and kind of forced to have to go into thought spaces that they're not comfortable going into, like people that want to
Mm,
stay in a more linear, fixed perspective. This energy can feel very violent, almost like it's forcing you to have to think more broadly about something that you don't want to have to think more broadly. And I think that can cause anxiety for some people too. And then maybe for others, it's a breakthrough, where you're like,
yeah.
in that state of, oh, I need this. I need this shift. I need this change in that way. Again, it's always dependent on what your own relationship to self is, which I always feel like the new and full moon is highlight the luminaries highlight the relationship to self every month in asking us those questions, right? So it's
Yeah.
definitely like your own personal experience in that way. But I'm not really looking forward to all the text messages I'm going to be getting of why do I feel so crazy right now? What's happening in the sky? And I'm always like, I provide this information for free every month on YouTube so that I don't have to do private text messages.
Just send them your booking link. That's what you that's what you gotta do. Um, yeah.
So funny.
So, and I think to kind of piggyback on what you were just saying, just to point it out before we move on, we don't have a whole lot of Earth anymore. Like, I mean, Uranus is still hanging out in Taurus, but at this point, we are so airy. We are super
So
air,
airy.
so airy. We're almost like balloons floating up, floating up into the big sky, bunch of helium. But then we have this water component that's which has some moisture quality. They both have these moisture qualities, but it is between this hot energy and this cold energy, this outgoing energy versus this is very internalized dynamic. I mean, and that's the thing too, you think about the idea of the mask, and the faces that we wear, and how we might be all Gemini on the outside and we're out there, we're doing our thing under this new moon or under this whole cycle. But there's this whole Saturn process that is
Yeah.
weighing inside.
Ugh. It's
That
so my reality all the time.
you're like, I get it. I get
Uh-huh.
it. Yeah. So yeah, once again, I think we're just coming back to the idea of duality and paradox and how we choose to live with that. So let us move on. There is no good or bad here. I think that's another thing I'm going to beat on home through this whole podcast. There is no good or bad. It is what it is. It's how you view it. It's the story you tell. All right. So moving on. Moving on. So basically, what happens is that we have Venus leading the pack now. So Venus is going to square Saturn, and then go on to, I think, sextile Chiron. So all these planets are going to square Saturn and sextile Chiron. First Venus does it. Then we have the sun doing it. The sun will square Saturn on June 9th. Then, Mercury's cruising because it's getting closer to the sun. And so Mercury is getting ready to, actually, I just passed it. Mercury squared Saturn around the 12th, June 11th, June 12th. And so
When
there's
I
this whole
smoke my first
period.
cigarette.
Yeah,
Just
no,
kidding.
no, 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 do it.
I won't. I'm not going to.
That's funny. That's oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I had the vision of you smoking your first cigarette. Because sometimes this is very Jupiterian. We have to experience things to know. So I could see you smoking your first cigarette right here, and then Saturn comes in, and you're like, oh, hell no.
Like, why
Oh,
did I do
no.
that?
Why did I do that? Oh, this tastes horrible. Or, oh, now I have a headache, or my body feels all weird, or it's emotionally affecting me. Sometimes we need to
Totally.
try things out to realize that that's a big fat no. Like,
True. Or the opposite happens where I'm like, oh my God, this is everything I ever wanted it to be. Fuck.
what do I do now? How do I instill those boundaries? How do I have discipline with myself? Because I know deep in my heart that this is not the right thing to do. Um, the temptation. So, anyways, we're all running into Saturn. Basically, from June 8th, after that new moon, to June 13th, we just got bam, bam, bam. Everybody's coming up against Saturn. So get ready for your Pisces, get ready to have a lot of preview into your Gemini Pisces story that Jupiter and Saturn are going to light up. I believe in early August is when that perfects, but the first pass. So, we're up against some things, which is not always bad. I mean, sometimes we got to deal with Saturn. We want to deal with Saturn. Maybe we're trying to put together this dream, this Saturnian Piscean dream that we have, and we got to gather all this information. We get information we don't like, and that says no, or that's not possible, or oh, we have to get clever about this. Like there's many facets of uh what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Saturn just stopped me there. Anyways, there's many possibilities that can come out
I
of
know what
this.
you're talking about. I know what you're throwing down.
Oh, throwing it down. But while all this is happening, let's back it up. Back it up. So not only are we going through the Saturn piece, this is very important. Is we got Mars moving into Taurus, which is going to happen June 8th. Actually, let me just put in here. Mars into Taurus. Do, 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 do. June 8th on Saturday. It'll be nighttime here on the Pacific coast. But that's going to be a major shift. We're going to have Earth back. Mars is going to be, but it's going to be in its detriment here. So, not the place Mars usually likes to be, but it is one of its Mars doesn't mind being an earth sign, so it has that going for it. But what the
Yeah,
big
I
thing
like Mars in
is,
an Earth sign
yeah,
personally.
well, you
Yeah,
have Mars in an earth
I
sign.
know.
Tell
I
me.
prefer it. I would say Mars and Capricorn's my favorite, but I do like it in an Earth sign.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you like about having Mars and Earth? Tell my Mars and air what you like about having Mars and Earth.
Yeah, I like having Mars and Earth in the sense that I think I am really good at organizing things when it matters.
Mm,
Like Virgo, I think gets this rap for being, very clean and organized, but Virgo has this other tendency to be kind of chaotic and scattered about it if it's not super reined in and intentional. And I relate a lot to those dichotomies with Virgo, where,
mm,
like I'll have the closet, the junk drawer that's really chaotic and crazy, but it makes sense to me. And this all goes there, while the rest of the space is very meticulously organized and planned out. And I think that when I've been in working environments, if those qualities are valued in the working environment, because they're not always valued, but if having that level of organization is valued, I tend to excel in that job really well. And I'm really good at problem solving. Also, video games. I am really good at solving puzzles in video games.
oh, I could see that.
Yeah, so if you're like on a mission, which is very Mars to me, like I'm on a
Yep.
mission, I'm like gotta go fight the thing. I'm not a good fighter, but I'm a good problem solver. Like, the Harry Potter game, like I played, and whenever it was like a puzzle, like it was my turn to solve the puzzle, in that game.
Yeah, that is definitely a trait of Virgo. Virgo is the problem solver, So I can see how that would be very useful, to just roll through life, practically solving problems, yours and
Nobody
other
likes it
people's.
though, really. Nobody
I
values it
know.
the way that I had to be told by therapists to stop doing that.
Oh, nobody wants their problem solved. No,
No, it
nobody
just
wants
is
to be
annoying.
fixed.
Yeah,
No, they don't know what they're missing.
they really
But
don't.
they don't. They don't. They
They
don't.
really don't know what they're missing. But yeah, I think in Earth, like it's just, it's more tangible.
Yeah.
It's like you're doing it more in like these fit. Like I loved visual merchandising when I worked in retail. It's like you're physically taking pieces of clothing, articles of clothing, and organizing it and changing the way that it appears and looks and trying to sell it. Those types of things are really kind of
Yeah.
fun ways, shifting the
Yeah.
space around.
Getting your hands on it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to have Mars move into Taurus personally, even if it doesn't have as much of its strength. I mean, I don't know how much strength we want Mars to have. We always have to remember it's like, I mean, Mars does have its good things, right? It's action, it's assertion, it's going out, it's getting something done. It is the mission. But Mars is also aggression and strife and causing discord and crisis and things flaring up. I'll be glad to get it out of
Yeah.
out of Aries personally. But there is this component of getting into Taurus, which is going to slow it down. It's going to put it under Venus's domain. It's going to maybe make it a little more stubborn, a little harder to move. We might be a little more tired, we might just be moving at a slower turtle space. Uh, Even though Venus is in Gemini. I think that'll be especially the case once Venus moves into Cancer, but there'll be this whole shift with Mars. But one of the big things is that Mars is going to square Pluto basically during this time. During this time that we were just saying, oh, we're having all these squares to Saturn. Basically, the Sun squares Saturn the same time that uh Mars is squaring Pluto. So that's a lot of tension in the skies around
Yeah.
June 9th and June 10th, which is my next dentist appointment. So
Oh, interesting.
Saturn rules the teeth. Mars for me is my sixth house ruler and my ascendant ruler. So this was the
Wow.
only appointment they had for me, and I was like, okay, I'll take it. And then I went and looked at the chart later, and I was like, oh, really? This is the universe. This is what you're gonna give me.
Not cool.
So
Yeah,
not cool. So I'm hoping. Pray for me, people. Pray
I
for
will
my
pray.
teeth.
Yeah, pray.
Pray for my crown that's supposed to go on that day. Anyways, there is a lot of tension in the sky. And has anything come to mind with Mars, Pluto, especially in fixed signs? Any intuitive?
I just feel like, ugh, that's how I feel right now.
Blah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not gonna try to do the like young modern astrologer person thing where I'm gonna try to make everything sound better than it is, but I do, you know what I mean? I do feel like the fixed squares are so constructive for feeling a need to accomplish something.
That's
And I
true.
think, yeah. And so I think even though Mars squaring Pluto feels inherently rude and violent to me in many
Yeah.
ways, I also think about if we do have this project or this goal that we're kind of pushing towards that does require us to, you know, be practical in our application and also more forward thinking and more growth mindset about what we're doing, the opportunity is there. It's that thing of like, pressure makes diamonds kind of energy
Yeah.
to me. It's like nobody great is great because they were just handed greatness. It's like you have to struggle. Like I was thinking about this, like going through my divorce where I was watching this show and I just kind of felt drawn to this show that was being advertised to me called Diara of Detroit or Diara from Detroit. It's on BET. But it's this woman that's like moving back into her mom's house because she's separating with her husband. And then she like goes out on a date with this guy and then he ghosts her and she can't like accept the fact that she got ghosted, so she believes something happened to him, and the whole show takes this turn that she's like a detective basically trying to figure out what happened to this guy. And it's really fun, it's super funny and quirky, but I had this kind of like awareness where I was like, no good story starts on a good note usually. Like it's, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the stories that we're interested in or the people that we're interested in usually have this like climb to something in some way where you almost like you want to hear about their fall. You want to hear about what they overcame. You want that story arc in some way. And I think that when we're going through square energy, especially like something like Mars and Pluto that could feel really like a fight we have to push through to get this thing done. I always am like, think about that. Like, think about how much more interesting your story is going to be because you had to push past
You had
that.
to
And so,
overcome.
yeah. So that's how that makes me feel on a
I love
personal,
that.
yeah, transpersonal. I don't know in terms of the collective, if, you
Yeah,
know,
well, we'll let them sort that out.
yeah,
No, I love that what you're saying. I mean, especially as we're in Gemini season, this is our we're collecting the story. We're telling the story.
telling the
And I
story.
think you're absolutely right. I mean, what show do you watch for the most part, or what movie do you start where there isn't? I mean, that's the whole essence of the hero's journey, is there has to be
Yeah.
this thing to overcome or this problem to solve or this thing that happens that sets us out on the mission, you know? I mean, even just looking at this energy to me, I mean, put Mars and Pluto together and in fixed signs, like it has this. That's why I love what the show that you brought up is it has this very like obsessive quality to it.
Yeah.
Like, like she cannot accept that she's been ghosted. No, I have to dig in and I've got to find out. I've got to know. I got to, lay down all the tracks. I got to do all the work to really like get in there. And so it can have this really obsessive quality to it. It can also like violently break things apart
Yeah.
that's very rigid or stuck, or whether that's in the collective, our own lives, are like a literal, you know, tangible thing. Like that to me, this could be when, a gust of wind, a strong gust of wind can break apart like some sort of I think about like a tornado or like, rip apart a house. Not that I want that for anybody, but it kind of has that vibe where the
Yeah.
the physical world can be highly susceptible to destruction
Yeah.
from strong winds. Um, so I guess we'll see what's going on in the weather then. But yeah. So just FYI, June 9th, June 10th. It's kind of a volatile situation out there, but it also has the makings of the start of a really good story.
I mean, Wizard of Oz, you know, hey,
I know, right? The tornado. It's
the
a tornado took
tornado
her there.
starts the
All
good
right.
story.
That's funny. And really what do we got going on too is we're leading to first quarter in Virgo, uh, which then we clean it all up.
Mhm.
It kind of has that vibe where we gotta clean it all up, sort it. But what's interesting about this first quarter in Virgo actually is it just happens to coincide on the same day as the Mercury Sun conjunction. How exciting
Mhm.
is that? So we have this first quarter ruled by the cazimi.
Mhm.
So I mean, really, it actually really does have a strong problem solving, getting
Mhm.
everything together, finding the solution, going through the struggle, and then all of a sudden it's like, ha, here's the information you need, or the call you've been waiting for, or the pieces of the puzzle that weren't quite matching yet. Um, I don't know. It kind of feels like tension, but because of that tension, things are activated and everything's starting to come together. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like that's just inherently what that does for me, like on an individual level. And I feel like I have a lot of these types of archetypes in my life where I can attest to it in saying that even with the tension, sometimes it's like there is the aha kind of moment that comes through a Gemini Virgo, kind of square where maybe you are over analyzing something to an extent, but maybe it's working out. This is a great time too, like if you feel guided to put something into a spreadsheet to ground it, it's like, how do I like, write everything out? You buy that journal that has the prompts on what to write out for yourself emotionally to get to that aha moment. Those types of exercises are really constructive during this type of energy, because even though Virgo can kind of feel scattered and analytical at times, it really does want things to be grounded in the tangible. It wants systems,
Yes.
right? Virgo is really good at creating systems, and so is Gemini. So I think that, what's your plan? What's your system? I think of, if we go back to the tarot in the Virgo sense, we have the 8, 9, and 10, of
Yeah.
the pentacles. And I think that those are really positive cards. The 8, we're working really hard on the goals. We're putting the plan into action. The 9, we've reached some kind of abundance or pinnacle of success with that
Hmm.
work that we've done. And in the 10, I mean, the 10 of Pentacles is considered to be one of the best cards, that you can see. It's like the diminished world card, where you've reached some level of wisdom around what you're doing in the physical. So it's almost kind of like taking that wisdom of what like in terms of how to apply yourself, creating systems, and finding the way through, not necessarily the way out, but the way through to the
Hmm.
next step.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, even just thinking about that too as next steps, especially if we just got through a period of stuckness or like up
Yeah.
against things, or like there's nothing better than to come out of that side by having your next steps, your next actionable, knowing what to do. Um, Even if that's just conceptually, like it's, yeah. I do love the idea of like the journal prompt and like getting and the spreadsheet. Like there's no better time.
Yeah.
Like get it organized. Like
Yeah.
Gemini can be a little chaotic. But Virgo is the side of Mercury where it's like, let's bring all that heady business and get it into something that you can, either touch or write or, organize. So it feels good in that, in those terms. So June 13th, this is going to be a Thursday. We're going to have that push to get our lives in order.
Yeah.
Wrap our heads
And
around
I think
all
too,
this.
mutable signs are good at seeing the big picture, like the long game, and I think with
Mm,
Mars and Taurus, it's like you're there to work on the work that needs to be done for the bigger picture. Whereas Mars and Aries, like all that Aries energy is not thinking about the long game. It's thinking about the right now. How do I
yeah.
do this right now? And the beneficial thing about the mutable energy, it doesn't slow us down, but it doesn't have us in this reactionary state. We're very much in the bigger picture. How do we plan for the future?
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of double-bodied signs, right? It has a foot in one and has a foot in the other. It can like live in these two different worlds. It can live in the in-between,
Yeah.
and know how to navigate that. And so, and what I will say about this time period, about June 13th, when we have this first quarter moon, is like get all your ducks in a row, because what's going to happen is Venus and Mercury, right? They're getting closer and closer together. And so we're going to have this, both Venus and Mercury, or basically we're going to end the Gemini season with a bunch of Neptune squares, which we know is usually not good for putting all the pieces together. It's not, this is where uncertainty comes back in, or mystery, or dreaming, or the imaginative process. But what happens is we're going to have first first Venus squares, and we are working, just FYI, with a 29-degree and 52-minute Neptune. Like this Neptune is so close to Aries that the flames are licking its feet right now, right?
Ah,
We're not going to get there. We're not going to get there for a while, but we are getting this anoretic taste of Neptune at 29 degrees. And so on June 16th, which is a Sunday, thank God it's a Sunday, we're going to have Mercury and Venus both squaring Neptune. So just chill. Like if there's any time to chill, it's definitely gonna be Sunday, the June 16th. Um, and then they're both going to move into Cancer the next day, which is going to definitely flavor the remaining days of Gemini season, but it's also going to give us the taste of what's coming with Cancer season. It's also going to change the whole flavor of Mars and Gemini, or sorry, Mars and Taurus, because now Venus is in Cancer. So there, yeah, it's a, and then the sun's going to square Neptune too. I'm going to put it all together in this nice package. We're going to talk about it for like a minute or two, and then we're going to wrap it up here. So then the sun is going to square, basically the sun squares Neptune like 2 hours before we have our solstice, and it moves into Cancer, which is going to be June 20th. So let's think about that Neptunian ending to Gemini season and the Cancer ingresses. What comes to mind? What are you feeling?
Well, this is something that's really common, I think, when you make a plan, like you strategize, like we just talked about with the moon sun square, and you feel really good about that plan and you start to do it, and then life happens, life's on you, or things maybe don't go according to plan, because that's how life works. Like you can put everything on paper, and this is how dog training is. Like I'm a certified positive reinforcement dog trainer, and they teach you how to write training plans, but with the understanding that most of the time nothing goes according to plan because behavior isn't fixed,
Mm,
right? And so there's always going to be all these variables, like bringing that word up again, that you are not always going to know to account for. So it's like, for example, if you're going to bring a dog to a park and if everything goes perfectly, then you can have this really successful training session. But let's say on that day that you go to the park, they decided to do construction on the parking lot, and there's 5 other people there with their dogs, and your client shows up 10 minutes late, or the dog had diarrhea all night the night before, and the dog or the client didn't tell you, and you're like, we literally cannot do a training session now. There's all these variables that can come into play. And then you start looking at that plan or that spreadsheet or that kind of on paper thing, and you start realizing there's all these other things that maybe you didn't take into account, or you didn't know you needed to take into account. And it can feel really, I'm using the dog analogy, but I think that this can go into like artistic, creative projects, musical projects, things that we're doing at work. There's all these unknown factors, which to me is the Neptune, like these
yes.
kind of, things that come up, and then it challenges our ego, our confidence, our sense of self. I can't tell you how many colleagues of mine in the dog world specifically will sit and have so much self-doubt and insecurity about their abilities because of the unknown factors coming in that they literally have no control over. Like it totally makes you feel like, am I good at this? Like, do I know? And it's like you literally can't control those things happening, right? So I could see like this kind of last square, there could be a lot of like that confusion or doubt around those perspectives or those thoughts, what we thought we knew versus what is still kind of happening. Also, there's the illusion, deception, fantasy element to all of this too. So maybe there's some form of needing to be more honest with ourselves about something that we are feeling about a situation, that depending on who you are, you're either going to look at the facts or you're going to lean into the illusion, right?
Yeah.
So those are
No.
questions that you'll probably be up against, I assume.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful analogy with the whole dog. Like, yeah, totally get it because there isn't, I mean, we can't account for things. There's so much that can slip through the cracks, slip through our well thought out plans and exactly how we thought something was going to go in our head. I think about energetic degrees too. And so these areas of Gemini and Pisces in our charts, like what are very old stories here? What are very, situations that are so at their end, at their finality, at their like this is a challenge, even like lessons or s- spiritual like downloads or whatever that how like I was reading the other day is like spirits like and I don't know who confirmed this, but spirits like I'll tell you 3 times. After that, I ain't telling you no more. Like when are you
Yeah.
gonna when are you gonna take it in? how many times do I gotta like, how many times do I gotta
Yeah.
give you the sign? It feels very much like that too. Like at that point, how can you doubt something for so long? How can you doubt yourself or your feelings or what, it is that you know? Like how many times you got how so it feels like very last strawy around that kind of vibe to me. So yeah, it'll be an interesting time for sure. But I do like it's almost like there's like this blessing that happens right after it, right? Because then, Venus and Mercury move into Cancer and then they make a conjunction. So even if there's like all that back and forth tension that we were just talking about around that Sunday, June 16th, it's like the following day, not long after, there's sort of the marrying of the acceptance or the intuition, kind of feeling things out and not having to think about them, or like honoring what it is that the intuition was saying the whole time that you have refused to listen to. um
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a blip in time, and that's why I like with the sun following it up, right? The sun's the last in the chain. So the sun comes and it's like, okay, I see what Mercury and Venus was struggling with, and now I have the awareness around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if it's challenging. And then we get to the solstice. Ta-da! Into Cancer season. So, I mean, that was a lot. That was a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's a lot. We
It's a
talked probably
lot.
too much about it. This is a long podcast. So, I mean, as I always ask, if you had one word to describe Gemini season
Oh man, one word is
2024,
not
one
very
more.
Gemini.
Okay, I'll give you two words only because that's on brand for Gemini. But
I liked yours. You had a good tagline, beginner's mind.
I feel like we're gonna need it.
Yeah, I think so. I think too, like I've been getting psychic downloads that are completely separate from the astrology that Gemini season's going to be a really powerful transitional period for a lot of people. Like it's going to be a very good time, like good transitional, like some auspicious kind of opportunities are going to present themselves in Gemini season for a lot of people. Like I just in my body, like for myself, I've been feeling that way. I've been feeling that way for a few people in my life. Like I've had it like on repeat, like Gemini season for a few months now. So I don't know. I feel like I have my own weird intuitive process with these seasons in terms of what they feel like are going to happen. And I think it's going to be a really good creative time if you choose to utilize that energy that way. You know, all of
Mm,
that Taurus, Piscean, Gemini stuff is so good for creative people, but if you're not hard, if you don't, actively engage with it, then you could end up in the analysis paralysis, anxiety, escapism tunnel. And so don't do that.
don't do that. Just
Just don't.
don't take the bait. Don't take the
Yeah.
bait. Yeah. No, I love that. So I mean, I I I'm super stoked to think about that transitional period. Beginner's mind is definitely apropos. I mean, especially with Jupiter. Jupiter's going to show us new things. Jupiter hasn't been in Gemini for 12 years. Think back to 2012. When was Jupiter? I guess I probably should have looked that up when
I looked
I
it
think
up.
I
Let me
already know
see.
that, but yeah, let's
I
May
wrote it
25th.
down.
Oh no, just kidding. That's this year. June 11th, 2012.
Yeah.
And then June 30th, 2000, if you want to take it back to that's interesting. That
Oh,
makes sense.
that is interesting,
That's when I
actually.
moved to California. That's when I
Wow.
got up and was like, I'm moving across the country. I want to
That's great.
sow my wild oats somewhere else.
I love it.
Yeah. Actually, I really liked 2012 was really good too. I mean, for me, Jupiter is in the eighth house here, so I'm like, I was a little hesitant, but if I look back on the times of my life, it's actually a very yeah, it's a good transit. Anyways, enough about me. But I think that beginner's mind is the tagline here. I might double down with that too. So you take beginners and I'll take mind. And now
Great.
we
I
each
love
have
it.
one word. We've done it.
That's
So
perfect.
All right. Well, thank you for staying with us so long, people. We've been talking a lot here. Hopefully, we have not bored you to death with the details, but there's a lot to discuss. So before we go, Annalisa, where can people find you? What you got going on? Tell us the deets.
Yeah, you can find me at my website, ladyofleosure.com. You can email me there if you want to do a one-on-one tarot or astrology session. I do transpersonal astrology and transpersonal tarot, I guess I would say. It's
Yeah.
the same type of tarot. And I also have an Instagram under that account. I also have a personal Instagram for my music stuff that's just Analisa.6. And I have a YouTube channel that's also Analisa Six or Lady of Leosure. I think both are associated with my YouTube. And I do horoscope videos for a sober lifestyle magazine that is called thesobercurator.com. So that's also something that you can find if you are in recovery and want recovery resources.
Yeah. Well, and if but wait, there's more. If you like rock and roll music, Annalisa's got her solo album, which had been on ice for way too long, had been on ice in the desert, has been released, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Yeah, I have a solo album called Shadows of Nine that is out on all streaming platforms too. So you can find that. And there's a physical CD version because I guess CDs are cool again, that you can find on Bandcamp too.
Love it. Yeah, go check it out. If you like good rock and roll, ladies rocking
Thank
out,
you.
which I do, you're gonna want to go check it out. So,
Thanks for the
well,
plug.
yeah,
Thanks for having me.
you gotta, yeah, of course. Gotta give the girl a plug, right? From one rock and roller to another. That's how we met. Just FYI, that's how Annalisa and I met. Our bands played together many moons ago in San Francisco when we were on tour. I had a band called Wild Honey, and we were on tour, and we played. Yeah, we played an awesome
Hemlock.
show, the Hemlock, which I don't think is
Yeah,
around
that's great.
anymore, is it?
I think they closed. Yeah, it's too
Ah, that's
bad.
a
It's such a good
bummer.
venue.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
good venue. Ah, ah. You know, so you just got to acceptance of change. Maybe that's also, I'm going to throw in with beginner's mind,
There you
accepting
go.
change,
Acceptance of change.
accepting change. You got
Oh,
to do it. So where can you find me? You can find me at energeticprinciples.com. You can book a personal consultation for astrology or tarot or a combination of both. You can also go to tarotofher.com if you would like to check out the Tarot of
woo-hoo.
Her deck. We are doing a pre-sale. There's only 50 decks available for a pre-order right now for the first edition. So if you are interested in getting a deck, by the time this goes out, there could be some. I just announced it, and we do have a mailing list rating, but I wrote this book and designed this
So
book of
beautiful.
like all types of very
You're gonna
pretty.
want this tarot deck in your
You're
collection.
gonna want
Tarot
this
nerds, you are gonna want
deck.
this. This is gonna be one of those classic decks for decades to come. You want this deck. It's beautiful.
You've heard it here first. We have a shiny, oh my, there goes my camera. Yeah, it's shiny backs, if you're like a crow like me and you like things that shine, we got all the bases covered. So tarotofher.com if you want to snag one of those limited decks. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram at both the handles too, Energetic Principles or Tarot of Her. But as you well know, I'm not the social media person too much anymore, and that's okay. You know what? I made excuses long time. I'll be like, I'm not feeling it right now. And now I'm just like, you know what? I'm not it. And that's okay. You know how to connect with me. Email me. Hit me up on my website. Watch the YouTube. Listen to the podcast. I'm here.
Yeah,
But
you're all over.
plenty of places. I
Yeah,
don't
you're
need to
plenty
be
of,
always there too.
yeah. I agree. You've got a deck now.
I've got a deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's way cooler than
So
social media.
yeah, you can find me in my office, in my solitude where I love to be, surrounded by my books. I'm like, oh, I can't I need to prep my brain for Gemini season because once Jupiter moves into Gemini, I'm like, I'm already out of room as it is. I need to free up space. Uh get
I
those
bought 3 books yesterday and I have books on the floor because I don't have space in the shelves.
Yeah. Get
the
ready. That's just
problem.
the start of the problem. That's just the beginning.
Yeah.
All right, Annalisa. Well, it's always a pleasure getting to chat with you on the podcast and, of course, in real life, too. So thank you for joining me on the program again.
Of course, anytime.
And for all you out there joining us we wish you the best of luck during Gemini season. Don't overthink it. Have a beginner's mind. Accept the changes that life likes to give us. And yeah, get that variety. It is the spice of life. And as always, may the stars be with you.